What's up, nerds? Quick detour video today to right or wrong. I'm kind of an idiot in that I spent a lot of time on a previous video and I actually made a follow-up video going through Angular and describing NgModules and basically, honestly, being kind of confused as to why the default application was so foreign to me. So like I set up, there's a video. Long story short, I used the default out of the box Angular app, didn't understand what I was looking at, changed it all into something I did understand, and then I recorded videos. But what turned out being the case was I'd been away from Angular for so long and front-end apps, it's just not what I do in my day-to-day job, and I do this just for fun, that I'd completely missed a major update. And it wasn't until I started working on integrating authentication and I saw how Angular did it now that I realized, oh, they were telling me something that this is the preferred way to build Angular apps and I should be building them this way. And I completely neglected that and just kind of skipped over it. So this brief detour is kind of righting a wrong, and we're taking this detour because we're going to set up the code in a way that makes using authorization much easier in future episodes. So I'm just paying off some tech debt. So, let's pay it off together on the record. So the title is Module Refactor and Modernize Angular Front-End Application, which is what we're going to do. We're going to refactor and modernize it. And it's just a detour to future-proof our Angular code base. Plus, we're going to do this DTO projection with JPA. So our code review objectives. 1, modernize our Angular code base. Refactor our code to take advantage of Angular's latest features. This is standalone components and removal of NgModules. 2, we're going to remove superfluous code, just some demo components that are lingering from other PRs that I used for explaining things, or other branches. Let's just get rid of them completely, clean everything up. And then we're going to fix a bad practice we were doing with JPA. We're going to return projection data transfer objects, DTOs, rather than the raw entities. Jumping right in, modernize our Angular code base. Angular 15 introduced these things called standalone components, which again, if you just build the first Angular app automatically, they create standalone components. And so what I did in this code review is to refactor existing components to standalone. I'm doing that because standalone components are simpler and more explicit. As you'll see, there's a lot less confusion as to what's going on, why things work the way that they do. And it future-proofs our code. The Angular team wants us to use them. We work for Angular, whatever the team decides, if we're going to build this way and use this framework to stay modern and have them keep supporting it, we got to use what they support. This is the latest and greatest thing that they use. So by using it ourselves, it makes it less likely they're going to deprecate it in the future and we'll have to change everything. So when you can do something tomorrow, just do it today. And these are the components that we changed. And we'll look at the code and we'll look at like the app.component. You can see that we've made some changes basically here. So we've added this standalone is true, and we've added an explicit imports here. If you look at the actual PR, and you go to app.component, you can see it more explicitly. So we've added this standalone is true, and we've added this import. And we're importing the router outlet. And what we're saying is we're explicitly importing the router outlet because this component explicitly uses the router outlet. So in the HTML file, it's referencing this router outlet component. So if we didn't have this import here, we would get an error that says like, you're using something we don't know what it is. You get this error. And so we've added explicitly the import here. And so it's one-to-one. You kind of understand what's going on. But what we had before was there was an app.module, which was kind of doing all this stuff for us that I've completely removed. So we don't need this at all because with 2 lines of code, we've replaced what's going on here. So in this confusing app.module, you were declaring the app.component, you were importing the router.module here, and that's what was joining them together. But that wasn't very clear, to be honest. But now with standalone, it's very clear that if your app.component HTML wants to use this router outlet directive, it needs to import it right here. And so it's one-to-one and it's tied tightly. And if you go to the create users component, button component, it's the same thing. We added standalone. We import our shared module, which has everything that we need, so that in the create users button, we can use, the async pipe or whatever else we need. And so when you declare these components as standalone, they're just available everywhere. So we have our dashboard HTML, which doesn't need to import any of the components. It just has, it's standalone, it does import them, but they don't need to be exported anywhere. So the exports are global. It imports the components that they need and it just uses them. This is much easier. This is so much better. The NgModules is confusing. It doesn't make sense what's packaged and how things are joined. But now, going through the code, you have the app.config. All right, it's standalone. We got it. This is just README documentation updates. But yeah, that's a huge win. So these dashboard components, you just import what you need, call it standalone. It's going to be exported. Boom. And it's very explicit what's going on. It's easy to track. It's easy to see everything that's happening. And then all these modules, all the routing modules are gone as well. So then you go back to most NgModules are no longer needed. Like we said, the functionality of these library modules is now handled explicitly in the standalone component. So you just don't need them anymore. And then we have routing modules before, and that's where we called out our routes, but we were using multiple routing modules. So you'd have one in the first component, which would set up all the paths for that component. So this is routing module A, and then you go to routing module B, and that would have its own, and then you would join them, and you have these 4 child routes, and it's all kind of convoluted and confusing. And what we have now instead is we have an application config, which is exactly what it says. It's a configuration for application. It has a provide router, which is very easy. And then you just give it routes. And routes is it's an array of routes objects. So we have one array that we load one time that's going to manage all of our routes for the entire application. So we're doing everything in one place, and everything is explicit. So our routes work the same as they did before. It's just we call it out here, and yeah. So yeah, that is cool. So we got that, and then we tidied up some stuff. So we removed all the demo components. The reason I'm going through this is because I'm trying to stay honest to being like, this is the code review. So, like I said, we went through app.routes. That's where we define all of our routes in one place rather than using routing modules. We configure the routes one place, one time in the app config in the provider. So we provide them there. And then all this stuff I deleted is just the demo. So nothing there of interest. It's just all demo stuff. And I will say, so we have a shared.module still. And this is just a time saver. So instead of having to import like 10 of the same things over and over into your components, I still have a shared module using the NgModule tag, where I basically grouped a bunch of commonly used modules that I need. And then I just import this one shared module into all these different components so that I have everything available rather than doing 10 things in each one. It's just a convenience. You could do it or not. If you didn't use this, you'd have to import directly the common module and the forms module directly in the component you want to use them. So I do use NgModules still, but just as a convenience, the shared module. The main.ts changes. So like the main file that you have, you use Bootstrap, the application app component as your main component, and then you pass in the config and catch any errors. So there's that. And yeah, that will close up getting rid of the code. So the last thing I wanted to show is a bad practice we were doing. If you recall, When we were using the user controller and we were doing get users, we used to return users, get enabled users. We were sending back actual user objects, and the problem with that, and you should never do this for two reasons. One, you're exposing sensitive data potentially. But even if you're not exposing sensitive data, you should never send the front end more data than they need. So if you look at our app the way it was, and you look at the users being sent, all of the data is there for people to see. The username, the user ID, the password, last name, first name enabled. So even though I'm only pulling out what I need, if you look at the actual network requests of getting users, somebody can just see all of the information in the user entity. And all it's doing here is just actually sending back, user entities. So it's sending back all of this information because that's what we've said. That is, just never do it. And instead of that, we've used user projections, which is the simplest type of DTO. So we've created what's called a user projection, and it's an interface. And it just says user projection. You can call this whatever you want, but it's an interface. And you have the data type, and you just have get, first name, last name, username. And these have to match to the entity properties that you want to use. So in the repository where we have find by enabled as true, we return an optional list of user projections instead of users. And again, the projection just maps exactly first name, last name, username, preceded by get with the right type. So with that little change, we update this here, and then when we call this, we update it here, and that's all you have to do. And by doing that, now on the front end, when you look at users who come through, you can see that instead of sending all the information, it just sends what you need. So you just have to define that interface, use it in your JPA repository, and it's going to immediately map the full entity just into what you need, and then that's what we get here, and everything works. That was the last thing I wanted to show you. We made the controller updated the type, we created the interface, and we used it in the repository. Hope you found that helpful.